Good evening. You're tuned into Friendship, the Power of Positive Living with Dr. James Hughey, a specialist in human affairs, and his special guests, all of whom will aim to help you take charge of the opportunities in your life. Let's go right into the studio right now and join Dr. Hughey for the Power of Positive Living.
Good evening. Welcome to Friendship Radio and to the grand march through life. My name is James Hughey, facilitator of the Friendship Personal Retreat Program here in Galveston and on ships cruising seas throughout the world. Offering the gift of listening hospitality, I invite you to join me here on KGBC, Friendship Radio for Southeast Texas, as we explore topics to enrich the quality of your life. Power for positive living and friendship. This is Charles Goodman, is a student development specialist, formerly with the Texas A&M college campus, I believe.
Yes.
Welcome to Galveston, Charles.
Well, thank you. It's a privilege to be here with you.
Well, Charles, you've worked with young people a lot in the Texas A&M system and probably in other campuses that you've been associated with. There were several topics in my mind that I wanted to explore with you, and I think they may be helpful for our listeners as you and I dialogue about them. And I guess the first one that comes to my mind is something that is important as young people who try to make the transition from being at home to being in a college campus, or from making the transition from being dependent people in a home situation to being independent in a different type of community. And the various stresses and strains that creates, not only on them, but their family and their friends as they make these changes that we've been talking about. Mm-hmm. And I guess I'd like to just open it up as to what have been some of your observations on what young people do face. And also, I guess after that, maybe some ways in which you've seen them cope in a healthy, maybe as well as an unhealthy manner.
Mm-hmm. The first thing that came to mind is something that I've said when I talk to groups where, and in many cases, in any organization I work with, there's always going to be a situation where one of the first things that we're going to do is we're going to take a retreat together to get to know each other on a very informal basis, to know what we were like as people. And then afterwards we can talk about the business of the day, what the organization's goals are going to be. But during that retreating that I've always done with students, I always say one thing, and I think that is that in any organization, in any entity that we're in, I think the essence of all things is a relationship. And that's from which all things will come, is from that relationship. So when you're talking about making transitions, and particularly in my world, in which students are making transitions from a world in which they've been at home and are moving to a college environment, from an environment where they will be in a residence hall or living on campus, or even that famous one of where they have to leave college life and pursue that JOB, and spell that out so it won't be such a nasty word. The essence of all of those things are healthy relationships. And certainly that's how ours was formed over many years ago, as I was struggling with some decisions and had the opportunity to talk with you at that time. But I go back to all that. I think that the essence of things are relationships. Now, those relationships can be with family, and I certainly think that that's probably the first and most important thing. I think the next relationship is developing a set of friends, a set of peers on any environment, whether we're talking about the working environment or even the college environment.
Well, let me just intercede here. You're on a roll.
Oh, look out.
You're on a roll there, because we've really talked a lot about friendships here on this program, being Friendship Radio. But I guess one of the things is, how do people make the transition from the home set of friends to going into an atmosphere where everybody is looking for new friends? Friends that are going to meet social needs, those friends who are going to meet emotional needs, those friends who are going to meet romantic needs, sexual needs, whatever. The whole context is changing, and it's all changing at once. How do young people make the transition? What are some ways that you see them making it in a healthy way as versus an unhealthy way?
Let me start with the unhealthy. That's the ones we see most often in my environment. And certainly I think sometimes that stress is dealt with certainly with alcohol and other drugs. And that's certainly one of the unhealthy ways in which people make that transition. I think there is a lot of fear there. I think, unfortunately, a lot of socialization is done in a setting in where alcohol and other drugs probably are prevalent. So I think that that's probably one area in which students make some unhealthy transitions. I think some people deal with the stress of that change very internally, and they don't do anything at all. They just let it fester within, I guess, if you will. And those two things come to mind immediately about unhealthy processes. I guess the more difficult aspect is to talk about healthy transition. I think a healthy transition is getting involved in a situation, maybe whether we're talking about a college environment, we're talking about a move to a new community, just like much I have done. I think involvement immediately in some particular area, whether it's the church or your work environment, I think involvement is probably one healthy way in which we can make that transition.
I interact sometimes with call-ins that there's a tendency to somehow think the community is going to come out and involve themselves in our lives when it almost becomes the reverse, to need to reach out and say, I'm here and I need to do that. Really, one of the things that Friendship Radio is striving to do is to focus on we are responsible for writing our own life novel. And in part of that writing is to prepare for situations that will be most healthy for us. And going off to school and adapting to a completely different culture, not as radical as Morocco, for example, but in many ways, when you're 18, it may seem like moving to Morocco. What are some ways that maybe they could prepare to make the transition as positive as?
In many cases, when we make that transition, the things that we talk about in order to get prepared is that, well, you need to go to orientation. You need to make sure you have towels and linens, and thinking about all these physical kinds of things that must be done in order to, make sure the car is full of gas, that you have AT&T call home car, and all those other kinds of things that I recommended when I was formerly with doing orientation. And I think in many ways, students are very well prepared in that. They get that part of it really prepared.
Very concrete.
Oh, yes, very concrete. Unfortunately, where is that checklist about the self, the individual, in regards to?
I'm asking, what can they do to prepare themselves?
To do that, I think that takes some homework. I don't think that that's certainly anything that can be done overnight. So if you're listening and you're fixing to go to school in the fall, time to prepare is now. I think in one thing, I think a positive mental attitude is extremely important.
Now, what does a positive mental attitude mean for a college student? I mean, how would you define it?
Well, that's a tough one, but I don't know if it can concretely lay it out and say, here are the specific elements of a PMA as described. I think it's one of those feelings that I can accomplish, I will succeed, I will do well. And then whatever obstacles may come, that if all else fails, if everything goes to where in a handbasket, that at least if anything else fails, that they'll still have an attitude, some self-esteem, if you will, about themselves, saying, I can't make it, I can't accomplish.
Sometimes I get the feeling when talking with young people that they are looking for almost the how to win friends and influence formula. There are certain things one does in order to be popular, one things to do, how to be successful with other people. Do you find that many young people come to college with this, or do they come just totally confused, or do they come with plans on how to be successful in developing a healthy atmosphere?
I think they come with some perceptions, and probably most more than not are probably inaccurate. You've got to stretch to grow. You've got to be uncomfortable. And I think about the high-powered sales techniques. And I sometimes think that that's what people perceive as normal in dealing with relationships.
One of the senses that does develop oftentimes, and when people get prepared for college and they develop all this preparation and the expectations are just so that college or university is going to be this way, and that I'm going to relate to people the very same way that I related to people at home. And they get to college or they get to the university, and those modes or methods of relating don't seem to work. Do you find that you have to really teach people in some ways how to build relationships differently than they did at home?
I don't think if we have to teach them differently, I think we have to teach them over again. Because what happens, I think, in a high school setting, particularly one in which you've maybe been there 4 years, you forgot how to make friends. You've grown up with these people, you've known them for a long period of time, and then all of a sudden you're thrust into a whole nother environment in which you may not know a lot of people. So I think that more than anything, I think sometimes they come in with wrong attitudes saying, oh, this is how we do it. Or we've got to start from the very beginning because they've forgotten. They've just simply forgotten. I think the other thing that I think college students come in with a lot of time is a tremendous sense, and it doesn't have to be just college students. Again, I go back to what I mentioned earlier, even just moving to a new environment, moving to a new community, or taking on a new job. There's a tremendous amount of fear there. And it's amazing what fear can do to us and as far as inhibiting us. And reminded of the old saying that our doubts are traitors and make us lose the good we oft might win by fearing to attempt. And so I think that in many cases, our college students probably go into that environment with a tremendous sense of fear that they think they're experiencing only themselves. They're the only one in a college class at Texas A&M where we're talking about thousands of students coming in at the beginning of a fall semester, and they're thinking they're the only one feeling that particular fear.
Well, I wonder if that's not part of what we were talking about earlier, which was trying to find some ways that you can prepare for an effective college year, and that's realizing that you're not going to be the only one. I've had that experience also where I've interacted with people, and they have the impression that they're the only ones who have those kinds of feelings, the only one who have those fears, apprehensions, and that tendency to not share that with someone else, I guess generally keeps it being unhealthy for them. Mm-hmm. And if we are recommending things that persons might consider, is recognizing they won't be alone. No matter what is going on, they will not be alone. And that's whether they're going to school or whether they're out down on the beach. The reality is that we are not alone as we struggle with these various issues of personal growth.
Mm-hmm. Very much so.
And I sense that one of the things I was glad to hear you say is that even though we may feel embarrassed, there is not the need to feel, because we do need to learn things over and over again. And some things I'm still shaking my head about that I still have to learn over again at this stage in life.
I was raised not too far from here in Galveston, was raised in Freeport, which is right down the coast here, and have visited Galveston and Seawall Boulevard and other areas time and time again. But this is the first time on the way here to the station that I had been to the port area or had seen this side of the town. And you said, a new experience for you. And I said, yes. And I think that's great. Those new experiences are very important. But I think also the relearning experiences are very important too. On the car trip over here today, we talked a little bit about leadership. You're saying that maybe was one of the topics we wanted to address, and maybe this is an appropriate time.
I guess leadership is one of those things that I think it's a continuation of what we're talking about when we make the transition from going in our community, being at home, and we go into a place that's entirely different, whether it's going to a college or university or someone like our age who might be going to another job in another state or something. I sense that we are not only leading other people in our lives, but there's this thing called leadership of self. And I've even heard it saying something like tied in with management of time and efforts. But I guess there's part of me that wants to do a little bit more exploring about maybe leadership of self.
Here in this program this evening, we've talked about writing our lives novels. And I think in order to lead people through their life novels, we probably need to have written some of our own before we start leading them through that path. We talked about management. I want to say that there's probably a little difference between those two. And again, this is not an original idea, but I think management tends to be of things, of objects, of goals, if you will. And then leadership tends to be leading of people. And so I think there's a difference between those two. And so I want to say that from the beginning, because I think sometimes we're real quick to just lump leadership underneath management of time and all those. And again, they're important. I don't want to say that they're not, but so is leadership. And I think we have to move in a little different area there.
We're talking about how would you maybe concretely, a couple of suggestions maybe on how to do some things that would increase our own leadership skill as human beings. In other words, what would be some things that you think might be either in leading others or in leading ourselves?
I think the biggest thing that comes to mind just right off the top, and for that fact, I'm smart enough to put this in my notes somewhere, it has to deal with self-awareness. I think a lot of times people come into any situation and they're aware of their experiences, and that's good and fine, but I sometimes wonder how self-aware we are. One of the things that we have to do is realize that there's a world outside of ourselves, to go out and experience different things. In order to do that, though, I think we have to go out and meet new kinds of people and be involved in new kinds of programs, do things a little differently than what we are, and if that means for sitting around the house just watching TV. There's not much I've ever learned from the TV, believe it or not, unless it's been a good educational documentary program. I think we've got to go out and participate in these programs that challenge our minds, that challenge our thinking processes, that help us realize who we are and how we see the world and things of that sort.
And if it's like most people, I imagine that we need to be reminded to be challenged on a frequent basis. We talked about earlier learning and having to relearn, because I know even though this is my life work, I constantly find myself needing to be reminded of some very basic attitudes and beliefs. And that's learning, challenging, going out and presenting myself in new and different situations.
Exactly. I guess if I were going to say, I could give 3 simple rules real quickly. One of them is explore. Second rule is explore. And the third rule is when in doubt, remember rule number 1 and number 2.
Explore. Well, Charles, it certainly has been good having you here on KGBC AM 1540, and I do appreciate your joining me here for Friendship Radio.
Thank you. It's been a tremendous opportunity, and thanks to KGBC.
I'd like to thank all of you who have been joining me here this evening on KGBC AM 1540 Friendship Radio for Galveston County. I do hope that this program has provided a valuable resource as you write your life novel, and that you will join me here each Thursday evening as we provide additional opportunities for insights as you write your life novel. I hope that you will be kind enough to join me again on Friendship Radio as we continue to explore topics to enrich the quality of your life. Power for positive living and friendship. This is your friend and host, James Hughey. Good night.